I wanted to start because I'm going to talk a little bit about the biochemistry, which is unavoidable, and I promise to be as simple as I can on it, but it's unavoidable when you talk about nutritional supplements. Then Jim is going to talk about the measurements, the analyses that show where we are on nutritional supplements and autism and some of the results that you've had. And then Dr. Jerry Cartzenall, who's the director of pediatric medicine at the Thoughtful House down in Austin, Texas, down in the hill country of Texas, will be talking to us more extensively about the clinical use of nutritional supplements. And Thoughtful House is a new entity that has finally opened in the last year for treating autistic individuals, and we're extremely pleased that it's up and running. Now, my talk is a short talk about teamwork. And I'm going to use an analogy that Bernie Rimlin used. We have the spirit of Bernie with us. And Bernie uses an analogy for explaining that nutritional supplements and nutrients work as a team. Now, there's a government man who goes down to the Arizona border because we're going to build a fence between Arizona and Mexico. And so he visits Dr. Adams here and says, we want to put up a fence. And Dr. Adams says, well, what you need to do is dig a hole to get started, and you're going to put in a fence post, and you're going to concrete it in. And the government man says, going to concrete it in, huh? How do you do that? And the professor of materials science says, well, first you dig the hole, and then you get the post, and then you buy a sack of cement, and you open that sack, and you mix it with gravel and sand and water. You pour that mix into the hole after you've set the post in, and you just let it set there overnight, and you'll see the next morning when you come back, the post is just solid, and you'll have a good fence. Well, the government man says, well, I got to go back to the fence administration in Washington and check this out. So he takes these instructions back to Washington, and he sees his advisory board. And his advisory board says, well, you know, we're going to have to check this one ingredient at a time. Right now, you know what's going to happen. They go out to their test plot, they dig a hole, they get a fence post, they put the fence post in the hole, and they fill it up with water. Okay, fence post falls over, the water drains away. Well, that's not going to work. So they put the fence post back in, they fill it up with sand, it rains, the rain washes the sand away, the fence post falls over. They fill it up with gravel, same thing happens. Next day says, well, you know, one of these things has to work. I mean, the professor said that if we use these 4 ingredients, we could stand the fence post up, and we know we have to test things one at a time. So they pour in the cement from the bag around the post. The wind comes, and it blows the dust away, and we had gray dust all over the neighborhood, and the EPA gets after them for getting the neighborhood all dusty. From this, the fence administration concludes that there's no way that water, sand, gravel, and cement will hold up a fence post. You will see in newspaper reports tests of individual nutrients. Vitamin E by itself is not a good antioxidant. Vitamin C doesn't work for this, that, or the other thing. These nutrients work together as a team. If they're antioxidants, they work together in sequence to move electrons around, to move hydrogen around, to take care of oxidant stress. Yes, by themselves, they're severely handicapped. But when we put them together as a team, we've got a force to be reckoned with in terms of making our metabolism work properly. Now, my example today is going to be vitamin B6, and there's a particular metabolic pathway in autism that we're concerned about. It's the metabolism of an essential amino acid we call methionin. Methionin is in protein that we eat. It's a piece of a protein. It's an essential piece that we have to get from our diet because we can't make it. It's called methionine because it's got a methyl group on it, and thio because it contains sulfur. Methionine. It's an essential amino acid that contains a methyl group and a sulfur part. The methyl group, when we put it on a molecule, changes the character of that molecule, and the sulfur, when we put it on a molecule, makes that molecule sticky. A sticky molecule can go around and collect things and get rid of what we don't want. Okay, methionine, when it gets activated, can give away its methyl group. And when it does that, it's got a big long name, adenosyl homocysteine. It gets rid of its adenosine group and it becomes homocysteine. And once it's homocysteine, we want to be able to process it down the pathway to make cysteine out of it, homocysteine to make cysteine. Okay, so what I'm doing is I want in our autistic kids to process homocysteine through an intermediate we call cystathionin to cysteine. Once I make cysteine, I can make glutathione from it, and with the glutathione, I can fight oxidant stress, I can fight inflammation, and I can do detoxification work. The problem what we've got in autism is we've got one metabolic pathway that does methylation, which is important for genetic expression. It's important for signaling in neurons. It's important for communication between neurons. It's important because it makes creatine, which is an energy truck, and our neurons get energy from this creatine. And it also has to make cysteine over here so that we can detox and we can fight inflammation. If something goes wrong with this pathway, we have a multitude of problems, the same problems we see in autism. But to do this, I need to process this homocysteine along, and it turns out that P5P, pyridoxal 5-phosphate, which comes from vitamin B6, is the cofactor or coenzyme that's needed to make these steps work. All right, there's a catalyst here and a catalyst here. We call those catalysts or reaction promoters. We call those enzymes. And these particular enzymes need the coenzyme form of B6 to work, P5P. All right? Now, we can take P5P orally, but when we do that, the phosphate comes off before it gets transferred into the blood. It's just the way the body works. Most of the B6 we buy in the store is pyridoxine stabilized as a hydrochloride, pyridoxine HCl. So when you buy B6 in the store, vitamin B6, it'll say pyridoxine on the label. Well, if we've got pyridoxine, we have to make P5P out of it in order to make this chemistry work. And in order to do that, we need zinc, which is necessary for the enzyme that puts the phosphate on, and I need some phosphate to make pyridoxal phosphate, and that comes from a high-energy phosphate molecule, ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and I need some vitamin B2 because it turns out in humans that B2 makes that reaction go faster. It makes pyridoxine become pyridoxal faster, and then the zinc helps the enzyme put the phosphate on the pyridoxal to make pyridoxal phosphate. All right? So if I want that to work, I need to do this. But it turns out that autistic children have a problem with that anyway. Tapan Audia found some years ago and showed us that phosphorylation step, that business of making pyridoxine into a phosphate, is very, very slow in our autistic children. And we have to give large amounts of pyridoxine or pyridoxal or pyridoxal 5-phosphate to get the pyridoxal 5-phosphate we want, the activity we want inside cells. And there's a signaling mechanism that tells our cells when to make pyridoxal 5-phosphate out of pyridoxine. And that signaling molecule is called melatonin. Okay? If you look at that last page in the book I told you, and you look up the scorecard for melatonin, you'll see it helps 62% of autistic children. What melatonin does is tell cells when it's nighttime, when it's time to clean house, when it's time to get B6 revved up, and it's when it's time to do some house cleaning work. All right? Melatonin comes from tryptophan, which becomes serotonin, which coincidentally also needs P5P. And then the serotonin is methylated by SAM. That's the activated form of methionine. In other words, the methionine has to methylate serotonin to make melatonin, so the melatonin can tell the cell to phosphorylate the B6 so I can have P5P. Looks like a circular argument, doesn't it? Well, it is circular. And if we break any point in the chain, we're in trouble because we can't get the enzyme activity that we want to make cysteine, which is needed to make our glutathione to detoxify our cells. Well, how am I going to get that working? One way is to take some homocysteine, put a methyl group on it, and remake some methionine, or I can get more methionine from the diet, and then using the enzyme activity that's needed to make SAM, to activate SAM, and that's magnesium, I can methylate it and get the melatonin I want. But in order to do this, I need maybe folic acid, maybe methylcobalamin or B12, and I need to get some methyl groups from either glycine or dimethylglycine. I can also do this with trimethylglycine. There's a number of ways to do this. But in order to get the B6 to work, to get this to do what I want, I need a whole team of players here in order to make things work. Now, you'll find in the manual that we want you to do one thing at a time. You try one nutrient at a time. B6 and magnesium are an exception. In autism, you use B6 and magnesium together, always. Don't try just B6 and don't try just magnesium. You'll be somewhat disappointed in the results compared to what you will find when you put the two of them together. But in order to get things to work in the best possible way, you have to give extra pyridoxine or P5P, and we need extra zinc, or we give a zinc supplement to activate the phosphorylase. We need riboflavin as vitamin B2 because it speeds up the process. We need magnesium because we can't make SAM without it. We can't methylate without it. And we get a synergistic result. And we want to make the melatonin, and you may have to supplement melatonin to get the melatonin working. You have to intervene somewhere. So the message here is that nutritional supplements work as a team. And you find out more about this by reading the Dan manual. It explains all of this. It'll help you use nutritional supplements in autistic kids, and it'll help you understand the teamwork that's necessary in order to get nutritional supplements to work. Our autistic kids have a problem in getting some of these enzymes to work with the speed or the kinetics that they would normally work at in you or me. Their metabolic processing of methionine to make energy, to do methylation, and to clean house and get rid of oxidant problems is much slower than yours or mine. That's the message for today. Dr. Adams, you're up next.